So often, like, in public, when parents, when the kids see me, right, they often point me out and they say, like, why is this uncle so short, right? Or like, why is this short uncle so fat, right? But I don't get to hear the conversations that come after, because, do the parents just brush it aside and hush to them.
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Sian Lee, a Singaporean advertising strategist who was born with a condition of genetic dwarfism. Born and raised in Singapore, Sian also lived and worked in Shanghai, Jakarta, and Manila. He talks to us about how he towers over others with optimism and ambition despite being the shortest anywhere. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, this week, it is such a great honor to bring in a guest whose stories will hopefully give you all some form of motivation and positivity, because despite the physical limitations that he was born with, his stories is all about how he seizes all the possibilities that life has to offer. And now, without further ado, let's bring in Sian to share his story with us. Welcome to Proudly Asian, Sian.
Hey Isabel, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Singapore. Now, obviously, before we dive deeper into the conversation that we have planned for this episode, why don't we just start with a standard question that I ask every single guest of mine on Proudly Asian. Tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up?
So I am Tze and I'm from Singapore. So I grew up in Singapore and I'm 26 this year. And I'm currently working in advertising because I want to be a storyteller, because I believe that, stories can draw people into my world, and it allows us to really develop empathy for others so that we can be more inclusive.
I know that you are actually, except the fact that you grew up in Singapore, you actually lived in so many places, for example, Jakarta, Shanghai, Manila. So I'm just wondering, how did the experiences differ when you lived in all these cities? And did you gain any perspectives from living in these places?
I think it was a really amazing experience living and working in those cities. And, the main reason why I went out of Singapore is because I wanted to step out of my comfort zone and to experience living independently and being able to network and connect with people from different parts of the world. So finding opportunities out there and understanding all the cultures. So I think just to start off with, Shanghai was one of the longest that I spent the most time abroad in. And it was really eye-opening. It's a very modern and developed city, very clean like Singapore. But, the people, they still speed, and over here and there, you still smell pee. But I think the biggest takeaway from Shanghai is really the idea of China's speed, where things gets done very, very quickly. So the buildings, it gets built really fast, and you can see evident in the physical change around you. And then coming back to Southeast Asia, you have Jakarta. I think Jakarta, you can really feel the energy of the people. They are very hungry for success and, constantly in motion. So I think the future is really in Indonesia, the land of the unicorns, visiting the offices of like Tokopedia and Gojek, some of the biggest companies over there. In Hong Kong, you have Alibaba and all the super apps. But outside of China and Hong Kong, we don't really have a super app. But, in Indonesia, there's Gojek, and it's really far ahead with the ability to build, to book a masseuse from your phone, to do a massage for you. So I think the biggest takeaway from staying in Jakarta is really what is the Tze dream, what's our dream for our future, right? And then moving to Manila, I think Philippines is all about the people. They're really nice and hospitable, very friendly, and they can speak English. So it's very easy to get around. And it's an archipelago of islands. If you look beyond the beaches of like Cebu and Boracay, you realize that there's a diversity of people and really the indigenous tribes that stay over there. It's really a lot of culture to really explore. So I think the interesting thing about all these cities is that they actually had colonial influences, and you get to see what is removed and what remains. It's quite like, the culture of the land, but it's also not really quite like the culture of the country, because there's really an intermixing from all these colonial influences.
And when living in these places, personally, did you feel like you had to navigate cultural differences much? For example, obviously not just in China, right? But maybe for yourself, you grew up as a Singaporean Chinese. Was there some differences between, let's say, Singaporean Chinese or Chinese people who grew up in China?
I think it's quite different in the sense that over in China they are a lot more face saving. So it's a lot about 面子, or your public image or how people see you. So when I attended the classes, you don't really see the students asking like questions during in the middle of the lesson. They tend to go up to the professor at the end of the class to clarify. But I think the interesting thing about like going to China, especially as somewhat like an expat, is that I'm neither recognized by both the locals or the expats, because on the one hand the locals see me as Chinese because I look Chinese, right? But I have a totally different experience growing up. I have a totally different worldview and way of seeing things. But yeah, at the same time, when you talk to the expats, they think the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, you're from China, right? They don't think that you're a Chinese that's from another country. So I thought it was quite interesting to be like, in neither categories, even though I'm actually a foreigner or like an expat that's staying in Shanghai.
I think you previously also mentioned that, one of the reasons why you decided to live in these cities is because you wanted to experience independent living as well. So, how was it for you?
Yeah, so I was in Shanghai actually, where I was doing a university exchange. And I think my biggest experience really was living independently in Shanghai, because I had to start from zero. I had to restart my life all over and be pushed out of my comfort zone time and time again. So, within the first day in Shanghai, I had to open my bank account, get a local SIM card, clear a lot of bureaucratic administrative processes in school, and even take a public bus. And it was like kind of like, growing up or like being at your first day of school all over again, where you need to learn the new ways of life and, make new friends, both locals and foreigners alike. And I think in addition to the daily hustle of life, I rediscovered my notions of self-identity and my sense of resilience. Because as you might have known by now, I'm different, right? I'm short. And actually, if you put your hands up into the screen, right, you can see that my fingers are quite small and shorter than usual, right? So I actually have achondroplasia, and this is actually short-limb dwarfism. So coming to China was actually a shock for me, because there are so many stairs, and I hate stairs, right? And being only able to walk when I turn 4, my mobility is a bit slower than my peers, and actually climbing stairs is actually not very ideal for my joints and my spine. But coming to China, I had to really adapt and really take it in my stride in order for me to go places.
Wow. It definitely does give us some insights into, how different cities could be built differently in a way that will become more inclusive, which is a topic we'll definitely touch on a little bit later in the conversation. But now I want to dive a little bit deeper about you obviously being born slightly different. Because you were born with a condition of genetic dwarfism, and for children, they generally wouldn't really notice how they might be slightly different from other people, not just in the sense of like physical limitations, but a lot of our guests from past episodes, as a child, they wouldn't really notice that there would be difference in terms of skin color, language spoken. That's just how children are, until maybe at some point someone points out that, hey, you're different. So, when did you realize you were born different, and how did you feel at that point?
I think from a young age, I don't really have a number for that, but I realized very early on that I'm different. And I think this really started off when I was in a public area. So people were staring at me, and it wasn't the simple stare, it wasn't a simple glance, but a really long stare. So when I walk to the left, their heads turn. When I walk to the right, their heads turn as well. And sometimes it came with a bit of finger pointing here and there. So people were obviously referring to me. And I think it was a very difficult time for me then because of how people viewed me in a different way. And especially being much younger, you're trying to find your space, find your identity. And, many a times I had this lingering question of, what is wrong with me, right? Am I imperfect? And I always attempted to find out, why people were staring at me.
Back then, I mean, just a follow up question, right? Family members around you, how would they react in those situations? Or, for example, from your personal experience, let's say if some of our listeners, maybe they live with family members with disabilities as well, how would you advise them to support their family members who were born with some sort of physical limitations and disabilities in those kind of situations?
My family members, they were okay with it actually. And I mean, they actually encouraged it in some sense where they didn't want to keep me at home. So they wanted to make sure that I go out, I'm familiar with people, I'm aware of, my surroundings and stuff. So I think for them, they were much, they accepted it much earlier than me, right? Because I think when my mom was expecting me, the doctors really told her that I had this condition and stuff. And I think they really wanted to bring me up in a normal way, just like anyone else. But I think in terms of all this all this like attention or like being finger pointing or stares and stuff, I think for parents or with loved ones with disabilities, I think that you can't escape it, right? But it's much better to face it head on, right? You can always stare back, right? No one says you can't stare back at them, right? But I think it's better to really bring the child out so that they're able to see the world and to really get used to being different instead of trying to protect them and keep them at home.
And sometimes when those people who point at you or who stare at you, maybe they just don't know better. And if they aren't hostile, I think there's also an opportunity for people like yourself or even family members who live with people with disabilities to go maybe have a conversation and educate them
Yeah.
about, maybe that kind of behavior is not acceptable, or maybe to educate them. There are people who live with these conditions and they shouldn't be seen differently. But obviously, stigmatization of disabilities still very much influences all parts of the world and a lot of industries as well. And definitely it's not easy to navigate. But how did you overcome the stigma that's directed at you with such a positive attitude?
Yeah, so I think with all the challenges that I faced when I was younger, I felt worthless and useless, right? I thought that I had no value because of my differences, especially being the only one with my condition. So I actually also felt alone at times. But I realized that, regardless of my disability, my family and friends, they love and care for me, right? They accepted me completely for who I am with unending kindness. Yes, they see my physical condition. Yes, they see my imperfections and flaws, but they do not judge, they do not avoid or look away. And I think they don't even explain it, but they just do it unconditionally, naturally, and really just holding a space of deep acknowledgement and acceptance of me. And I guess being a Christian also helps as well, knowing that there's a God that loves me wholeheartedly, gives me a very calming sense of assurance that I will not be facing the challenges of life alone, but really with the support of someone far larger, far kinder and far stronger. So all this helped me to realize that, yes, I have a disability, yes, I have imperfections and, emotional hurts, but, my disabilities and imperfections do not make me who I am, and that I'm more than that actually. I can define who I am and who I want to be, right? And that is that I really want to embrace all that life has to offer and to really live a life of resilience. So even if people feel my condition negatively, that doesn't really matter because what really matters is how I see myself.
I just love how you really stand by this attitude around you define yourself by what you believe and what you stand for rather than the physical conditions that you were born with. So I definitely find that very inspiring. But when it comes to people around you growing up, I'm just wondering if teachers in the schools that you attended also played a part. Were they helpful at all in the sense of maybe trying to educate your classmates and schoolmates around your condition?
I think my teachers are great. Like I'm really thankful for them, and shout out to all of them for really helping me to become who I am today. And I think the most helpful thing that the teachers did was to really treat me as any other student. So there were certainly some special provisions like physical arrangements, but in terms of homework, exams, or even misbehaving in class, I was treated all the same. So if I was late for school, I had to do detention, right? I couldn't have any exceptions and say, oh, I'm short, so no detention for me. Nothing of that sort. Yeah, but in terms of the physical arrangements, my teachers actually allowed me to use the elevator, right? And they also shifted all my classes to the ground floor so that, I do not need to really huff and puff and climb up the stairs. In primary or elementary school, what the teacher would do at the start of the year would be to introduce me to my classmates, that I have a physical condition, right? And it doesn't make me any different, right? And to help me if I needed help, like reaching for high stuff or if I needed to carry something heavy. So I think all in all, I'm really grateful that, the teachers, they went the extra mile for me. And I think it's something interesting to note as well, so is that many of the teachers, or rather the education system in general in Singapore, like they are still very progressive and they are also very hungry in trying to be updated on how best to really support students like myself with disabilities. So actually when I was in university, I was invited by one of my former vice principals to really to give a talk to all the vice principals in her region. So I think that's the northeast of Singapore, right? And I shared my experiences in school, what were the accommodations in place, and how could it be better, right? What were the barriers that I face? And I think it's really heartening to see that it's not just one case, but they're trying to make it on a policy level to really help students with disabilities, because sometimes disabilities may not be physical like mine. I think there's a whole spectrum, and you can also characterize it as visible and invisible. So it's really a lifelong process that they're really trying their best to really support students like myself.
I mean, it's great that they actually took the initiative to move the classes to the ground floor, so it's more convenient for you. And earlier in the conversation, you also mentioned when you lived in China, there were a lot of stairs
Yes.
that you had to go through. So I just have a question around how Singapore is designed as a country for people with disabilities, right? Because you lived in multiple cities, how do they compare in terms of the overall attitude, level of understanding about disabilities, treatment, and accessibility?
I think Singapore is doing pretty okay in having an inclusive society, right? And what's an inclusive society? To me, it's a society that everyone can contribute to with equal access and opportunities, especially for persons with disabilities. So for Singapore, we have achieved progress in enabling physical access for the elderly and wheelchair users. There's a lot of lifts. There's a lot of ramps as well. Removing a lot of like physical barriers, or even like the use of like text to speech technology, like in the bus stops or in the trains for the blind, and even the podotactic tiles on the roads and stuff. But I think like in terms of like social access, there has been a fair bit of work done by the government, right, and the NGOs in really facilitating the integration of persons with disabilities. So ensuring that PWDs or persons with disabilities can participate fully in the economy through job matching programs, and really trying to increase the employment rate for PWDs, or even the Purple Parade. So there's this super cool thing called the Purple Parade, which is kind of like your Pride Parade, but it's more of like a unifying national platform to really promote awareness and celebrate abilities of like persons with special needs. And it's something that actually I participate in as well, marching along with the contingents and advocating for inclusion, right? So this is all the good stuff about Singapore, right? But where I'm a bit concerned about is because, while the voice for disability inclusion grows louder and it seems to be a norm, right? My concern there is that, is this actually a perceived norm, that just appears on the surface level, but people may not really accept or agree with in society. And what this really means to say is that, are the social barriers removed, right? Because I think Singapore has the sense of like political correctness, or what we call as PC. So often, like, in public, when parents, when the kids see me, right, they often point me out and they say like, why is this uncle so short, right? Or like, why is this short uncle so fat, right? But I don't get to hear the conversations that come after, because, do the parents just brush it aside and hush to them? Or, how does a parent explain what is disabilities to them, and how best to respond to people like me, or like, what does it mean to have a disability, and that it's just different but differently able, but not that we have no abilities. So I think, in Singapore, to really remove like the social barriers from like negative prejudice attitudes, or like mindsets or labels, I think there needs to be ultimately the openness from society, really, to see and treat persons with disabilities equally, and not out of like charity or social good alone, or even being politically correct. So that's just how it is in Singapore. In terms of like China, or rather maybe I just cover the Southeast Asian cities first, so like Jakarta and Manila. I didn't really have any experience in terms of like that much a rich experience in terms of how they treat persons with disabilities. But in both cities, mobility is much lower, right? So like in Philippines, whereas in Manila, the roads have potholes, right? So this is actually not very it's not very conducive, for persons with disabilities. So let's say if you're on a wheelchair, or if you're on crutches, right, it's definitely very hard for you to get around on top of the traffic jams. And then in China, I think the infrastructure is much better, right? There's a lot of staircases, and occasionally you see a lift here and there. But then for these cities, they tend to categorize persons with disabilities in a certain area, in a sense that they only determine certain jobs for them. So like for Jakarta and Manila, we tend to see more disabled people as beggars on the streets, right? I don't think they have as much educational opportunities. And then in China, they are more of in the show business, right? Like working in the circuses, working in like reality programs, to give some sort of like inspirational porn or some sort. So a very interesting encounter that I had in Shanghai was that there was this guy who out of nowhere just walked up to me, right? And then he was like saying in Chinese something along the lines of like, "You're from this show, right? I saw you in this show, right?" But I have no idea what he's talking about, because I was never on China television, right? And then he was just like so adamant about it and being so rude about it, as though I was really the show. But I think I realized later on that that was a show for like persons with disability, with dwarfism, right? Like a big kind of like your Snow White and seven dwarfs kind of show. Yeah, and then that's when I realized, oh, okay, so this is how they are like over there. And I also met some inspirational speakers as well from there, and they share with me that growing up has really been a challenge for them, because China is a land of giants.
I mean, it's just so fascinating to hear how the design of the cities and, even people's reaction when seeing you are so different. And, other than the cities that you lived in, have you ever been to any places or any cities that you thought, wow, this is really not designed for people with disabilities? I'm only asking because for myself, I've been to some places where I would see maybe for a whole connected facility, there are certain parts of the facility that would have, some sort of accessibility stuff built in it, for example, elevator. But then sometimes when I really think through the user journey, right, it's like, oh, there wouldn't be a way for other connected facilities for, people with disabilities to access that final point where it would be more convenient for them. For example, like in order to access the elevator, I've seen places where you would have to go through a certain stairs. So it wouldn't be so friendly for people with wheelchair. And I would think that by default, it's kind of like a design fault in terms of accessibility. I'm just wondering for yourself if you have also experienced places like this.
Yeah, certainly, but I can't remember any offhand. But I've definitely been to places where I make a mental note, like, oh, this is somewhere you cannot bring a person on wheelchair.
Right.
Like there's no way that the person can get around, and
Right.
there's no way you can push the wheelchair, like for example, up a mountain, or that sort. Maybe I should make a list of all these countries, and then can name and shape.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would definitely be very educational because, like, normally when you point out the good examples, people are like, yeah, whatever, they are good. But then when you actually point out the bad examples and how they are bad, that's when people have their attention on them a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, just now you talked about when you were younger, people would point at you, and maybe these days kids might still have comments when they come across or when they see you. But I'm just wondering, throughout your life, were there ever any moments when people made comments about you or the way that they treated you that are still kind of like stuck with you that you might actually think about it from time to time?
I think that there are still labels, like people still give me labels, like it might not be directly to me, but eventually I hear it from someone, or like, they always say a little bird whisper into your ear. But like they call me like the little guy or the short guy or the small man, that kind of thing. But like, I have a name, right? To characterize me like that. But I think otherwise, it's something that I am not very sure of also, because I can't really tell whether people are treating me differently, because I think I've just gotten used to it overall. But in some sense, it has been normalized to me. So I don't really know if people are like, really treating me in a different way. But I know that many people, when they meet me for the first time, they do tend to get a shock, right? So they may not express it, right? But it takes them a few days to, know that there's someone like me, someone with my condition, with a positive attitude, right? That is a bit crazy, that kind of stuff. Then it takes them a few days to process it, and then they realize, oh, he's very normal at the same time. Like he does the same thing, is able to function well, and then from there they're able to, I think, be a bit more open in interacting with me. And I think sometimes people are also a bit afraid that they may like insult me accidentally. So I think sometimes people also hold themselves back, because they're also not sure exactly how's the best way to deal with me or to interact with me. Yeah, that's more of direct interactions. But then indirectly, in Singapore, like every few days, there'll be someone taking a photo of me, and it's very obvious that the person's taking a photo of me, because either they didn't turn off their flash, or they're holding the phone in such an awkward way, right? Because you don't really hold your phones up when you're using it, but then they're holding it up and then they're pointing it at me. So it's quite obvious that they're taking a photo of me or taking a video of me. But I do not know where does that photo or video go to, and I do not know also, like, if people share it, how then do people respond to it? Do they laugh along with the joke, or do they call that person out?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely sounds terrible. And, like, other than your personal experience, do you have friends who also live with disabilities? And what are some of the misconceptions about other people with disabilities as well? Because I've heard some examples, right? Like, some people might assume people with physical disabilities are also born with lower IQ, which is absolutely not true.
Yeah, so I think some of the very common misconceptions is, if I had to categorize it, there's two. Firstly is that people with disabilities, they need help. And the second one is that, they have like no abilities, or they have super abilities. So it's like a wide spectrum. So I think the biggest issue is really that people with disabilities need help, or that they are like in need of saving. And I disagree with that misconception. I think actually society needs help. So there's actually two models of disability, medical and social, right? And in the medical model of disability, um, disabled people are actually seen to play a passive role where they need to be cured. They are presumed to be unable to contribute, or really, to participate in normal life. While, the social model of disability, it sees the inability of a person to function in society not because of their condition, but because of the societal and environmental barriers. And that is that, it is not being universally accessible to everyone. So it's not the individual's fault for not being able to participate, but rather because society is not able to provide and meet the needs of everyone. We only meet the needs of the majority. And so in that sense, we're not really disabled by our bodies, but we're actually disabled by the world around us. And the next one is this school of thought that, persons with disabilities have no abilities or super abilities. I believe that it's not that persons with disabilities have no abilities, but rather that they are enabled differently. So, we can do the same set of activities as you and me. We can live, we can play, we can, like I went through school, I do everything normally except skipping army, right? Which was a delight for me. But we can contribute likewise to society. And on the other hand, we are also seen to have super abilities, like as a sort of like inspiration, where we have overcome immense challenges, like we saved the world, and like we have overcome all these limitations with a superpower and achieve a great feat. And I mean, yes, we have a very tough life, but that doesn't really make us very special. because I think it's just being human, being resilient, overcoming the odds and not giving up. Because at the end of the day, what we do is really very ordinary things, right? And we're just doing what everyone else does.
I mean, obviously, I do think in this day and age, in the world that we live in, sometimes having faith about life and also staying positive, to some people, it might be somehow of a superpower. So, yeah, definitely, it's an incredible journey that you've come through. And I guess the other question is, as you lightly mentioned earlier, right? Not everyone, would like to see people with disabilities from kind of like a discriminative lens. Sometimes maybe they just genuinely don't know how to react or what to say around when they come across people with disabilities, but they still want to help and understand, but they just don't dare to ask. So, what will be your advice for people who want to get to know people with disabilities and who want to show that they are supportive?
I think the most important thing is don't help unless they ask for your help. Like if you see like someone struggling in public, right? It may appear that he or she is struggling, but actually it may just be a process, or you actually see something very ingenious unfolding before you. So rather than actually helping the person, you may actually be just helping yourself, to really feel good and to be seen as a good Samaritan to those around. But I think if you have the genuineness and the real heart to want to help, I think the most important thing is to ask a person, can I help you? And then follow exactly what they say. Because it's not just because they know best, but also because, the person actually may not identify with being a person with disability. So I think don't be afraid to ask, and ask them how they like to refer to themselves, and their disability and what you can do. Remember that they have dignity. So, give them your respect. And why I say that is because actually many persons with disabilities, they don't really identify as having a disability. For example, do we call someone a blind person, or do we refer to them as like visually impaired, right? How about people with autism, or do we call them autistic people, right? So I think overall, disability is still a very stigmatizing term, and many of us are still getting bullied or coming to terms with it. And disability doesn't really need to look a certain way. It's more than just being short or being in a wheelchair, because there's so many different shapes and sizes, whether it's visible or invisible. So our societal perceptions of disability tends to be very narrow when there's a lot of different cases out there. So really just read up. There's a lot of resources out there, a lot of TED Talks. I mean, you can watch mine, yeah, but there are a lot of content out there to really on how you can best really support persons with disabilities.
I love how you mentioned earlier in the conversation as well how not all disabilities are visible. There could be people who are struggling with mental health issues, and that could also be classified as some sort of invisible or mental disability if it's diagnosed or if the person recognizes it that way. But I know that for yourself, you are a very passionate advertising professional yourself, and you currently work as an advertising strategist. I'm wondering if you hope to one day produce work that is inspired by your personal experience that will help change the perceptions of people with disabilities.
I'm actually quite jaded. Yeah. So I came into the industry inspired by a lot of the purpose campaigns, but actually it's just very emotional ads, and the campaigns were done mainly to win an award or to drive more sales, rather than trying to raise awareness and being at the core of what the company is. But in terms of like what I see for the future of advertising, what I really hope for and really want to work towards is to have greater representation in the ads. So right now, a lot of it's in the space of LGBT, race, and a bit of like age positivity, but you don't really see the token disabled person. And even if there's a disabled person, a lot of the representation in advertising, it tends to focus on the more distinctive traits of atypical bodies, right? But then, like you mentioned as well, disabilities are invisible, right? And even more so with the concept of intersectionality. So you would find actually more disabled people among the minority groups, like the lower to middle class that is not white, but you don't see that on the ads. So I'm someone who really believes in representation, because I think it matters, because seeing people that looks like you or seeing yourself on the screen, relating to the characters and being able to connect to a reality or culture or experience that is not commonly shared by others, it can be very powerful. And like a case in point, not so much on disability, but more on race. It's like the Disney Pixar movie Encanto, right? When people watch it, not just the professionals, but also the kids, right? When they watch it, they were so excited because the characters look and sounded exactly like them, right? So I think, how can we have more representation of persons with disabilities in the ad industry, and or maybe in culture in general? Like how can we start young, or like with storybooks, because this is where your stereotypes start. I think that there has been a movement towards like being more representative as well in all this kids content, right? So something that I actually helped out earlier last year was that in the Ministry of Education, one of the publishers, they actually reached out to me for the middle school or secondary school course book, and I basically shared my profile with them, right? I mean the textbook immortalized there, right? And it's basically to of this whole idea of the chapter is all about how can we build a caring nation and an inclusive society, right? And then one of my profiles was shared there, and people understand that I have a disability, what's my disability about, and that I'm contributing to society and being included, just like anyone else. So I think if the advertisements and the culture does not shift, then our society does not shift.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I also agree with how you mentioned these days in popular culture, we are seeing the efforts on widening that representation in terms of diversity and inclusion in popular culture. Those efforts have been ramped up quite a bit. We see companies bringing in plus-sized models, ballerinas as a cartoon character, as well as earlier this year, Turning Red, which was, a story about this Canadian Chinese little girl. It's amazing to see, the diversity of these content, but we definitely are not quite there yet. There's still a lot of opportunity for us to widen that representation, and we're definitely going to watch this space. And I hope that one day we'll get to see your work that you are also proud of. But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. And now in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions they've got asked personally at some point in life. So I know you have quite a few questions that we need to go through. Are you ready, Sian?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Well, first question. Have you always been like this? Will you become taller?
Yeah, I've reached my limit, so I've stopped growing, and I won't become taller, but I'm growing sideways.
And next one, can you be cured taller?
I can't. Yeah, it's something that I was born with, and there's no medication or anything that I can take to become taller.
And the third question is, are there things you can't do?
I can't sing. Yeah, but I think relating it more to my physical condition, I can't carry heavy stuff, and I can't do like high impact sports because all of this is not very good for my knees.
And the next one is, this is usually a comment that you get from friends when they hang out with you. Why are there people looking at me?
Yeah, so actually they're not looking at you, they're actually looking at me. Yeah, but I'm with you, so that's why you think that they're looking at you, but they're looking at me. Yeah.
In a funny way, it's like at least they get some attention when they hang out with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and finally, how is it that you're always so happy, brave, and positive?
So I'm actually not always happy, brave, and positive. I also have dark moments and also sad moments in life. But I think for me, it's just about realizing that you can really choose how to respond to the challenges in life, right? And just to really experience all that life has to offer.
Obviously, we all have ups and downs, and it's up to us to choose how to react and how to see the things that are happening to us. But thank you so much for answering all these questions in this segment of Rapid Bias. And now, to wrap up the episode, I'm just wondering, there's this question, I'm so curious, if you have the power to change any circumstances about your life, would you do that? And what is it that you would change?
So this is a really difficult question that I don't really have an answer to. But I think in general, I think like life is good. So there's nothing much to really change my circumstance about. But the thing that I'm saddest about is that, because of my condition, I am so easily recognizable, right? And for me, as I shared earlier, I don't really I'm not really concerned with how people view me, right? So I tend to be a bit more daring than my friends, a bit more YOLO, or like you only live once, as compared to other people, right? So sometimes I have a knack for being mischievous or being naughty, right? But I can't do it because people will recognize me. If someone records a film, it's definitely me. I can't pretend to be someone else. So I think that's the only saddest thing from being born with dwarfism. Like I can't do all these shady, naughty, cheeky things compared to other people.
So it's like the only thing that you would change is if only you could be a little bit less recognizable.
Yeah, I need to find a way to blend in better and then not stand out. Yeah, and I can, do all this stuff.
Yeah, and anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
I guess, life is short. So am I. So, let us bring more hope, bring more happiness to one another, and really just do something meaningful together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And finally, before we go, I'm just wondering to you, what does it mean to be proudly Singaporean?
I think it means to be an underdog, right? Because Singapore wasn't where it was previously, 50 years ago, and it's where it is now. And I think no one expected it to succeed and thrive. And I think in the same way also, people don't expect me, to be so happy, to overcome all the challenges in life. And even like when I go for school camps and stuff, I also do all the high elements. And like even at a recent company retreat, I was crazy enough to do the most challenging course of the campsite. So I guess that's what it means about being Singaporean, about being underdog, and and being feisty, and really overcoming all the challenges that comes your way. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us on Proudly Asians, and thank you so much for sharing your voice so generously, your story with us and with all the people around you. Just keep on shining the way that you do.
Thanks, Isabel.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.